Hello, country lawyers and juvenile delinquents and all the ships at sea, and welcome to A Very Good Year, the movie podcast where we invite a guest to pick their favorite year of movies and talk to us about that year. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
Our guest today is quite simply one of the finest writers of our time. He is the author of numerous books of essays, fiction, poetry, and film criticism. He's the editor of the Library of America's essential collection, American Movie Critics, an anthology from the silence until now. His first collection of his own film essays, Totally, Tenderly, Tragically, was published in 1998. His latest collection is called My Affair with Art House Cinema, Essays and Reviews, and it's out July 2nd from Columbia University Press. It is our great honor to welcome a legend, Phillip Lopate. Hello, Mr. Lopate.
Hello, Jason. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. As I was saying before we rolled, the new book is really wonderful. It's just a sharp and eclectic cross-section of pieces that you've written over the past 20 plus years for a variety of places. And so I guess that's kind of my first question about it. You've written a lot of really great film criticism in that time. What were your sort of criteria for the pieces that you wanted to include in this collection?
Well, I eliminated everyone that was stupid and just kept the smart ones. Because, it's you're called upon to write a lot of different things. As it happened, I was always writing about art house movies because I was never asked to review the latest Marvel Comics movie,
Sure.
I was always asked to review art house movies. And so, when I went through all this collection, it seemed to me that that there was a nice balance between movies of the past and the present, and movies of all different continents except for Antarctica, maybe. So, basically, I put it together, and it was very large. And then my editor said, it's too large. So I cut 100 pages, and that's what I got.
And so, talk to us a little bit about the title, because different people define these things in their own ways. What to you is sort of contained or suggested by the phrase art house cinema? And when would you say that this love affair with it began?
Oh, that's a good question. When I was a kid, I was going to the movies all the time. I was movie mad. And then when I was about, let's say, 15 years old, I started getting this idea that movies could be more than just entertainment, and that they could be complex and challenging. And I started going in New York, to the Museum of Modern Art screenings, and places like that. And actually, I explored the whole city by going to these screenings, so I'd find out that there was a screening in some church basement, and that would allow me to see that neighborhood, Anyway, I got very interested in this idea, perhaps this snobbish idea, that movies were an art form. I never doubted that they were an art form.
No.
So, it didn't bother me when people use the word cinema, okay, whatever you wanted to call it. I wanted to see movies that were complex and challenging. And it was a great period when I fell in love with movies, late 50s, early 60s. And it was the new wave. It was Ingmar Bergman. It was Sacha Ray, all that kind of stuff. So the real question was, could I take dates to the movies that I wanted to see, So sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Right. That's great. What do you think? I mean, do you think the art house cinema is still with us in contemporary movies? And if so, what kind of state is it in, do you think?
I think there is still art houses, in many cities. I think that artistic movies are being made. And certainly there are a lot of film festivals, many more film festivals than there used to be. So a lot of movies now in different countries are basically made for festivals. You know, then they're not expected to do that well in their home box offices, but they're sent to Cannes or to Berlin or Busan or anywhere like that. So yes, I
Got it.
do think that let's say it's a niche. It's maybe not as exciting in terms of stirring up the whole public as it used to be in the early '60s, but they're still being made. Every year there are like 24 really interesting films that are being made, and this year was no
That's
different.
definitely. I definitely agree. You close the book with a pair of really lovely pieces about going to the movies now, specifically going to revival theaters here in New York and revisiting the films that you love in that setting. I love our rep scene in New York. I live in the Bronx. I don't take advantage of it, I feel like, the way I should. I'm constantly sort of guilt tripping myself for not going out enough. What is the key for you? What does it take to get you out of the house and back to the cinema these days?
Well, I love to see movies in movie houses. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'll watch a lot of movies. I'll stream a lot of movies, but I still like to be in a movie theater. Um, and especially to see a very large, beautifully projected film, which and just in terms of background information, it's huge. It's really important. So I'm also something of a completist.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if there's a director that I'm interested in, let's say Frank Borzage, there's been a recent series of his films. So I've seen a lot of Borzage, but I haven't seen that particular Borzage. So I've got to complete it.
Right.
So there's something slightly pedantic about the whole thing. I like George Cukor. I would see, they're showing The Model and the Marriage Broker. Probably a minor film, but,
Right.
let's see what Cukor's going to do with that,
Jason,
Yeah.
how
So,
is it to interview yourself? How's this going? As you interview yourself, how's it feeling to?
This all seems very familiar to me, Mr. Lopate. This is all right. Well, what year did you pick to talk to us about tonight, and why?
I picked 1959, which happened to be the year that I graduated from high school and entered college. And
Okay.
and I did feel like it was an epical year, not just in my life, but it was the beginning of the French New Wave, and it also was a time when there was a lot more global, international film that was suddenly being shown. So, for instance, there were these series of Japanese films that were floating around, packages of Japanese films. And suddenly we were all watching Ozu and Mizoguchi and Kurosawa and Naruse. And then, the Indian films of Satyajit Ray started hitting our shores. Of course, the French, the Italians, La Dolce Vita and Visconti's films, Rocco and his brothers. So it really felt like a great time, an explosion of global cinema. And all kinds of new things were being tried. And at the same time, you had a lot of the old timers who were still around. You had John Ford, Howard Hawks. You had Carl Dreyer making his last movie. So, there was this merger of these two tiers, you might say. The classical cinema and the about to be the new like the French New Wave, the deconstruction of classical cinema.
Correct.
So for me,
That's
it was
great.
a great time.
Yeah. Well, you've put together a really wonderful top 5 list, and I'm anxious to get into it with you. Before we do, Mike is going to walk us through a little bit of what was going on in the world outside of the art house cinema in 1959. Here's headlines.
Man, I love the headline segment, but this is such a deep stacked year. Like, I mean, this is the second time we've done 59, and the barrel we haven't even started skimming the top yet. Like, what a year. Let's do it. January 3rd, Alaska becomes the 49th state in the Union.
Mm-hmm.
We just did that because of the Russia thing we had going on then, right? Or do you believe my theory that our plan is to actually absorb a big piece of Canada like every 100 years or so. What are they doing with it? Am I right? Freaking polar bears. Nothing. They really turned that place into something. Later in the month, a big boat hit an iceberg off the coast of Greenland and sunk, and everybody on board died. Does that sound familiar?
Wow.
Yeah, this was the Danish ship MS Hans Hedtoft. So not the famous one, but this is like decades later. It seems like they would have stopped doing that and just float your big boats closer to the center of the circle.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What do I know? February 2nd is the famous Dyatlov Pass incident. Anybody ever heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident?
Tell me.
Lots of great TV shows and podcasts and articles about Dyatlov Pass. It's a big mystery. I'm not going to spoil it. But this is the thing. Okay. Everybody who talks about this stuff is like, they also talk about like aliens built the pyramids. So it's a fascinating, amazing story, but like keep your bullshit detector on high. All right?
Okay. Good to know.
1959, the Dalai Lama left Tibet and went into exile in India to hide from the Chinese government. This is the same Dalai Lama who hangs out with like Bono and all those people now. Same guy, like not like the same office, like the same individual person.
Yes.
Moved to India in 1959. The whole Tibetan Buddhist lineage moved to India at that point, where they started meeting British people, which led to schools in the West that have utterly and completely changed my experience of life. So, sad start to the story, but I think we've benefited from it. Shout out to Chung Yum Trungpa with his drunk ass. In June, Charles Starkweather was executed by the state of Nebraska, and he was not a good guy.
Oh, that was Badlands,
Yes.
Yeah.
Charlie and his lady Carol were the inspiration for Mickey and Mallory, also in Natural Born Killers, I think, right? I've just always assumed that.
Yes.
But now I said it out loud on a movie podcast, so the comment section is going to let me know if I was right.
Direct inspiration for Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek in Badlands, yes.
On August 7, 1959, there was a fire at Garrettson Building Supply Company in Roseburg, Oregon. Okay, that in itself, I admit, is not a very interesting story. But parked outside of the Garrettson Building Supply Company was a truck, and on that truck was a 2-ton load of dynamite and 4.5 tons of ammonium nitrate.
Oh.
So what do you think happened to the truck when the fire got there?
Yeah. Oh dear.
Leveled 8 city blocks. And I don't know if you've ever been to Roseburg, Oregon, but they got about 12 blocks. So leveled 8 city blocks, left a crater 52 feet across and 12 feet deep. 14 people were killed. It's called The Blast, if you ever want to know more about it.
The Blast.
Okay.
Later, not very creative with their names, but quite a story. Later in August was the final annexation of the great Pacific nation of Hawaii as the 50th American state. I would argue white people have not been a blessing to Hawaii.
No.
And like, does that count Oprah? I think it kind of does. Anyway, this is not
when
the
I go
podcast
to Hawaii, it's a blessing.
There you go. So wait, so just so I'm clear on this, both of the last 2 states came in the same calendar year.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Okay. All right.
And we are in it. And finally, 2 good stories. On December 1st, the Antarctic Treaty is signed by 12 countries, setting aside Antarctica as a scientific preserve and banning all military activity on the continent. I think that's a positive thing. They should do that to all the continents. Just ban all the military activity, and then we won't have to do all
There we go.
Then on December 26th, we went to the Heritage Mountain Range, right, which is a mountain range in Antarctica. We went and climbed it 12 days after the first time it had been sighted by humans. I also think that's a good story, right?
Yes.
Like, we went together. There was a group of us from different countries. We went and climbed a mountain. That's healthy competition.
There we go.
Okay, one last little thing, and then we're done with headlines. Everybody knows the origin of the words Arctic and Antarctic, yes? Does everybody know that?
I don't. I thought they just named one and then they named the other one sort of like it.
Arctic comes from the Greek word Arctos. Do you know what that word means?
I do not.
That word means bear. So Arctic is where the polar bears are, and Antarctic is where there are no polar bears. I swear to fucking God, that is the name. I love a name that gives you some information in the name, right? Now, in this case, you have to like know ancient Greek and then interpret. It's a little bit hard to. It's a little bit of a road to path to follow.
Yeah, please bear with me. Yeah.
Right. Arctic is where the bears are at. Antarctic is where there's no bears. That's headlines.
Thank you so much, Mike. Phillip Lopate, are you ready to do a top 5?
I am, but before we do the top 5, I just want to point out how cinematically rich 1959 was, because in addition to the top 5, it was a year when Pickpocket, Rio Bravo, Nazarene by Buñuel, Hiroshima Mon Amour, there was just so many good movies that came out that year. The Nun Story, it was incredible. The Letter That Was Never Sent, so it was really a good
I love
year.
that movie.
That's a good movie. I almost put that one in. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to discuss the 5. So what I'm saying is that it's not that these 5 that I love any of them more than the ones I just mentioned. It's just that
Right.
I had to do something,
There we go. You got it. You got it selected somehow. All right. Well, what then is the first film on your top 5 for 1959?
Okay, it's The 400 Blows.
Toute la presse en émoi. Ce gosse vient de faire éclater une bombe. Les 400 coups, a dit Henri-Georges Clouzot, est un film qui m'a positivement emballé. Le film le plus sensible que j'ai vu depuis la guerre. Quant à l'appréciation de Jean Cocteau, elle ne fut pas moins élogieuse. Je n'ai jamais été si bouleversé au cinéma.
Which really, in a way, launched the French New Wave. It was a very, very popular movie. It was a very tender movie. Unlike Breathless, which was more revolutionary, but which had a psychotic cop killer at the center of it.
Right.
This had this sweet kid, who basically was a recipient of close to 400 blows. The first movie with Jean-Pierre Léaud. And one of the things I was thinking about was how Truffaut had actually been a rather mean-spirited critic, but then when he made his movie, it was so sweet and so tender, it brought out something else in him. And the whole movie is also a real city movie, because Paris is as much a part of it as is the kid. So the photography by Henri Decaille it captures that great quality of Paris. It's not the romantic Paris. It's the Paris that Parisians live in.
Right. Yes.
And then of course the famous ending where the kid is running and running and running, and then there's nowhere more to go. He runs into the water, and so what does that mean? Does that mean he's got to start all over, or he's going to kill himself, or what? We just know that he's come to a freeze frame, one of the most famous freeze frames in all of cinema.
And really one that was duplicated almost to a point of inescapability. It seems like in the especially in the years right after it came out.
Exactly. So he had made this short, Truffaut, Les Mistons, the Mischief Makers, and then this was his first feature film. It's a very poised film. It's very beautiful. It's very inventive. You think it's about one thing, but it keeps coming up with more and more incidents. That's what's so good about it.
It's an incredibly assured debut in terms of his just his sheer confidence as a filmmaker.
Yes.
As a first timer. Do you recall, Philip, when you first saw this film and sort of how your initial reaction to it?
I saw it around when it opened, and the film, as you know, is dedicated to Andre Bazin, who was sort of like a mentor and father figure to Truffaut, who actually been something of a juvenile delinquent,
Right.
And so, I think that Truffaut had absorbed a lot of the lessons about mise en scène from Andre Bazin, and that's part of what made it so assured. It had a kind of point of view.
Mm-hmm. And then of course this character, Antoine Doinel, what was one that he returned to in the years that followed, is sort of the a good early example of sort of, what Linklater ended up doing with, the before movies and that sort of thing. How do you feel about the rest of those films and sort of where he ended up taking that character and where that series of films went?
I think that 400 Blows is my favorite.
Sure.
I think that some of them are a little bit coy. It's almost like the tragic element was dropped out, and all you had was this sort of playful young man, sleeping with different women. I think they're okay, but they're not my favorite Truffauts. The only one that is my favorite Truffaut of the Antoine Donnell is 400 Blows.
His reputation, I feel like as of late, especially among some younger cinephiles, he doesn't have this. It feels like, the sort of preferred French New Wave filmmaker now is Godard. It's almost a sort of the way that Keaton is preferred to Chaplin among the silent clowns. I think for some similar reasons that I think Truffaut is sort of seen as more sentimental, more sort of traditional as opposed to the kind of edginess of Godard. But I feel like, especially in a lot of these early films, there really is an edge to them and a darkness to them that is...
Well, sure. I mean, if you look at Shoot the Piano Player or Jules and Jim, they have a lot of edge. And anyway, I think that whether a film is radical or not is not the only way to look at cinema,
Definitely.
It's not the only standard, And a young person may think that that's very important to be radical, But I think that the humanism of Truffaut and the conciliatory side of Truffaut and the wisdom of Truffaut is just as important to my mind.
Agreed. All right. Well, what then is the second film on your top 5 for 1959?
Second one is The World of Apu.
আর বেশি কি লিখব আমার কথাটি ফুরলো আর অনেক বানানো ভুল হলো জানি তুমি হাসবে তা হেসো আমি তো বই লিখি না চিঠির পক্ষে এই ঢের.
Which, as you know, was the third. Talk about one of these series.
I was going to say, I love that we have one film on this list that was finishing a series and one film that was starting one.
So it's the first film was Padre Panchali, the second one was Aparihito, and the third was The World of Apu. Now, Padre Panchali is something of a miracle. It still is a miracle. You look at it and you don't understand where this thing came from, and it feels almost like a documentary. It's very reserved. Talk about accomplished, It's magnificent, Aparihito, the boy is a little bit older, and he's growing up a little bit, and it's a warmer film. And then you get to The World of Apu, and by that time, Satyajit Ray has become an internationally famous filmmaker. Right. He is no longer a secret. The first film, Padre Panchali, Andrew Saris didn't know what to make of it, and he called it UNESCO cinema. He just, it's like, what is this thing, But by the third film, everybody was looking forward to Satyajit Ray films, and Ray's style had changed a little, and there were many more expressive close-ups in The World of Apu, and many more basically expressive gestures, So it's another film that, it's a heartbreaking film, basically.
It is.
Because first half, is a love story. And Ray is not slow to do close-ups of this incredibly beautiful woman, Camilla Tagore, who we could look at forever, And then her character dies, and that really divides the film into two. And then our hero becomes a kind of anti-hero. Basically, he's just running away from life, running away from everything.
Including his very young son.
His young son. And that whole thing that happens at the end where he comes to finally embrace his son and the beautiful way in which the son has to be moved to embrace his father. When he first when our hero says, "I'm your father," the kid picks up a stone and throws it at him. Like,
Yeah.
where have you been all this time?
Yeah.
Don't expect to fall into your arms.
An understandable response when your father has literally abandoned you as a baby. Yeah.
Absolutely. And abandoned him as a baby. The grandfather's been taking care of him. And so, who is this guy? And it's an interesting portrait of a kind of a failed artist, because the hero is actually a would-be novelist. And one of the most shocking things that happens in the movie, of course, is when he throws away his novel.
Yeah.
And it almost made me
hard moment for any writer to watch, I'm sure.
I know. I always tell my students, keep another draft, keep another copy. You can destroy that, but get a photocopy.
Yeah.
Anyway, when he throws it away, I almost wonder if this is a kind of a religious or a spiritual idea that you have to give up everything, empty out everything. Whether this is part of Ray's Hinduism. In fact, my understanding is that Ray was a rather secular filmmaker, was not particularly religious, but there's something deeply spiritual about this film somehow.
I think everybody can sort of understand the idea that's present in all kinds of religions and traditions of sort of in mourning, a funeral pyre, burn everything,
you give up everything.
I had a cousin who his father died and he dug a hole that was 12 feet deep and 12 feet across, and nobody really understood what was motivating that, but that was what he needed to do to sort of process, I mean, the kid lost 40 pounds while he's out there digging this hole. It's one of those things where it has a sort of nothing's ever going to be the same, so why should anything be the same?
And we know that this is not the first death in the trilogy, because there's the first death is the sister's death, which is really sad. And then there's the father's death, and then there's the mother's death. So, in that opening of World of Apu, it's raining, and he's sort of joyously, stomping around in the rain, but I can't help wondering about the sister in the first film who dances around the rain and then catches cold and dies,
Yeah.
There's a lot of echoes in these films,
There are. That ending, I mean, this is sort of a recurring theme, is that we talk about on this show. Sometimes there are these films that are just that you watch, you're engaged, you're involved, but sometimes a film's ending pulls all of the emotions together with such force and such power that it elevates the entire film. And I adore this movie, but that last scene, I gasped in emotion. It's so powerful when they finally.
The hero has got his son on his shoulders, and and I can tell you that as somebody who has a daughter, and when she was very little, I used to carry on my shoulders. It's a feeling, It's like the unicorn. It's a merger of you and your child,
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Yeah. Very powerful. Beautiful, moving motion picture. Mr. Lopate, what then was the third film for your top 5 for 1959?
The third film is another black and white film. Okay. This was this was a moment when black and white films were still being made, as it would be for maybe another 5 or 10 years. Before the labs would refuse to process black and white cinema. But anyway,
right.
And it's Anatomy of a Murder by Otto Preminger.
Hey. There is a new movie coming to this town. All those involved in this film will now be sworn in.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you have done your job in this picture to the best of your abilities? James Stewart?
I do.
Lee Remick?
I do.
Ben Gazzara?
I do.
Arthur O'Connell?
I do.
Eve Arden?
I do.
Catherine Grant?
I do.
And you, Duke Ellington? I do.
I am very drawn to Otto Preminger's movies because they're always sort of psychologically complex.
Yeah.
And he was a kind of classic filmmaker who basically kept the shot going as long as it could. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so he's not into this into too much of a close up, close up, close up. You know, he and the thing opens with all this kind of car and moving around um, and I love the fact that James Stewart is when we first meet him is kind of a clumsy guy, not heroic in any way. You know,
Mm-hmm.
a kind of retired a lawyer or semi-retired who lost an election as DA. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and is then pulled into this uh, as a defense attorney into this case of murder.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the movie, of course, has an unforgettable performance by Lee Remick, who is
Yeah.
sexy. I mean, the moment she is on the screen, you feel that
Mm-hmm.
she is using her body, you know, as a lethal weapon, basically. She's doing
Mm-hmm.
everything she can. And there's a wonderful moment uh, in the film, in her dialogue, where she says, you know, men have always been hitting on me. And like you're interested in me. And all we've seen is Jimmy Stewart listening attentively to her. And suddenly
Right.
we have to think about his attentiveness in a different way. He's
Yeah.
also radiating some kind of pheromones or whatever you call them, you know, like she's picking up something on him. And we think, yeah, of course. How could he not be interested in her, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a very strange movie because essentially he gets off his client who may actually have been a killer without any justification.
Yeah.
In other words, is justice really done, or we don't know. Um,
Yeah.
but it's a movie that has a lot of grace in terms of the way the camera is moving through space, the way it treats that town. You know, um, the whole feeling, the whole mise en scène of it is something that Preminger did so gracefully and automatically. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yes, he was one of those directors who the French New Wave glommed onto as an inspiration. You know, a Hollywood director. Of course, he wasn't pure Hollywood is from Germany or Austria, but in any case, um,
Yeah.
I have a real Preminger lust. You know, I really like his films,
Yeah.
and this whole quality. Ben Gazzara as the killer is so
Inscrutable almost.
inscrutable. You know, you feel is this the guy I have to get off? You know.
Right, right. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about this James Stewart performance because I feel like I recently read, not recently, I guess it was a couple of years ago now, but Scott Amon put out a wonderful dual biography of Stewart and Fonda and both of their
Right.
careers and as filtered through their friendship.
Interesting.
And one of the stories that he told was that I guess later in his life, Ben Gazzara gave an interview where he talked about getting cast in this movie and said, you know, I came on this set thinking, you know, the cock of the walk and like, you know, I'm this hot young method actor and I'm going to show this old school,
Right.
you know, BS Hollywood actor how it's done. And he said from
Yeah.
the first second he was on set with him, he was enraptured by Stewart. That
Of course.
that this man was at a point in his career where he had been on film for so long and it was such second nature to him that he could just exist on camera and you were watching
Absolutely.
everything that he did. And I thought about that story when I was watching this film because he's 100% present, but you never catch him acting ever.
Yes, absolutely. Now, what we know in this period of the 50s and 60s is that directors started finding in Stewart some darkness, you know.
Yes.
We know Hitchcock, both in The Man Who Knew Too Much and also especially in Vertigo and even in Rear Window, you know.
Yeah,
Something else. Or Anthony Mann, you know.
definitely.
They were finding something odd in Stewart. And I think that that Preminger was playing with that as well. And of course, Stewart was playing with it. He knew how to
Yeah.
project something more than just likability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that he understood his everyman quality, and he also knew how to subvert it in really interesting ways, I think.
So true. And it's particularly with when he's playing against Gazzara, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Gazzara wants something from him, wants to put him down, wants to get him to say something, and Stewart won't do it. In fact,
Yeah.
in scene after scene, Stewart gets up and says, "Okay, that's what we're doing for today." You notice that?
Yeah.
Instead of he keeps getting up, like, and Gazzara's like, "Wait, that's all?"
Yeah. Yeah.
So Stewart is controlling the situation more than Gazzara would like.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a masterful performance. All right, Mr. Lopate, the fourth film for your top 5 for 1959. What's it going to be?
It's going to be Ohio by Ozu, or Good Morning.
子供から見りゃ大人の挨拶なんて無駄って言やみんな無駄みたいなもんだからね。
そのくせ大事なことはなかなか言えないもんだけどね。
そうだね。無駄なことは言えてもね。
Of course, madam. I love you.
Good morning.
This is a kind of light comedy, which is very unusual for Ozu, because it's not one of the masterpieces like Late Spring or Tokyo Story, but it's incredibly enjoyable. In a way, it's a remake of an early film he made called I Was Born But, and it's these two boys who really are totally adorable, and they're rebelling against their parents because their parents don't want to buy a TV set for them. And we're watching Japan at that moment when it's on the cusp of becoming a consumer society, and also on the cusp of becoming a much more affluent society. Because early on, and I remember discussing this with Kyoko Hirono. I said, why aren't there so many great Japanese movies anymore? She said, well, a lot of them were made when Japan was a much poorer country. And now that it's a bourgeois affluent country, there's not the same feeling of mono no awari, of the transience of everything. So,
sure.
So Ozu is seeing the influence of America on Japan. It's partly TV, and who knows what Ozu's feelings were about TV, because clearly, TV was seen as a competition with cinema.
Right.
But it's the whole feeling of Japan suddenly opening itself up to not just to Western culture, but to American culture. And yet the kids are very sympathetic. They want TV. We get it.
Yes.
I remember when I was a kid, my parents didn't have a television set, and I used to go over to a friend's house to watch TV, Captain Video and all that stuff. So I know what it was like to be a kid who wanted a TV, So yeah, they want a TV. And they also are studying English. So there's a lot of this American stuff going on,
The little kids saying, I love you, and the parents are all like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, they all treat it like it's just silly when he says, I love you. And I'm just like, that... What, man, we've seen several Ozu movies this year, and like these are all first time watches for me. And I've just been absolutely thrilled by this guy's ability to do so many different things, turn so many different tricks.
Yeah.
And this movie's just all these just postcard shots that are just perfectly constructed.
Michael, what did you think of the color in it? It's such beautiful color.
The colors are natural and yet perfect and saturated and beautiful in a way that, like, I sort of feel like when you get that level of saturation of color a lot of times in movies from that era, there's a lot of extra color, or it's not the sort of natural colors, the earth tones. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. Even if you don't pay attention to these wonderful children that are all over it. I mean, and the question, like, there's the whole scene in the bar where all the guys are talking about, oh, the kids want a TV, and they're like, what TV? And that felt to me like sort of Ozu and his what a conversation he would naturally have. But he's treating the kids and he's treating them with so much respect. you
so
know,
much
and the
respect.
thing that they want. Like that to me felt like, well, here's my opinion about it, but that's not what we're going to make the movie. We're just going to make this one little scene with me and my buddies whinging about the thing, you know.
Yeah, because
Wonderful movie.
Chishu Ryo, who is the substitute actor, the great actor that Ozu using it again, is the one to say, "What? We're going to have millions of idiots, you know, if you have all this TV, you know." And of course,
the idiot box.
That was what people said that that TV was going to bring a nation of idiots, you know. So but Ozu was saying, "Let it happen," you know.
Yeah, we're halfway
No way
there.
of finding it.
So I had seen this one before when the Criterion Blu-ray came out a few years ago and love it. What I just saw of his very recently, because for the same reason a Criterion Blu-ray came out, was I just saw Floating Weeds and A Story of Floating Weeds. And that is a similar situation to what you're talking about here, where he is doing a color remake later in his career of an earlier black and white film. What do you think it was, why do you think he was so drawn to revisiting these stories and recrafting them in new styles and to this sort of this inclination towards revisiting films that he had made before?
Well, I think in part because he had a new tool. He had color.
Yeah.
And he wanted to see what these things would look like. So, in fact, Floating Weeds, I think, was a 1959 film also. Anyway, and so, yeah, he wanted to see what's it going to look like when they're in color, you know? And it's a real change when Ozu moved toward color, you know? Because there certainly a certain kind of gravitas disappears, and there's a more of a sort of a cheerful quality, you know, but also a kind of, I don't want to say stoical quality, like everybody is just, you know, they're just living their lives, you know. So it's not tragic at all, you know. So he wants to see what he can do with color, you know. And he did quite a lot.
I think too, it's really important to say on this one before we move on. You know, I know we have casual listeners. We have listeners who are not cinephiles, who may not know Ozu or may not know kind of where to begin with a filmmaker like this, who may be intimidated by, you know, a Japanese film from the 50s. I feel like this film is such a perfect entry point into his filmography. I mean,
it is not intimidating at all. And the little boy is just amazing, you know, because he really differentiates the two brothers, you know, and the little boy is such an extrovert, you know.
Yeah,
he's so wonderful to watch.
Yeah, no,
it never stops.
It's a gentle movie. It's warm, but you know, it's got TV obsessed kids and gossipy moms and drinking dads. There are fart jokes in this movie. Like, you don't think fart jokes when you think of Ozu. It's a wonderful film.
He keeps soiling his pants and saying, "Mom, can I have a new pair of pants?" Oh my God, this is not a good period for this boy.
It's hard to make a movie with such low stakes that is so, you know, that you get so engaged with. Like you mentioned the gossipy moms and all the little back and forth with the neighbor and the neighborhood dues and all this kind of stuff. The stakes are very low, but you're sitting there like, oh, what happened to this money?
Exactly. Well, there's no question that it's using the setting of this kind of suburban houses, you know, so that we're really aware of these people, neighbors, basically snooping on each other, getting on each other's nerves, you know. Supposed to be such a happy life, but there they are, you know, all jealous of each other, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then the fifth movie is Crimson Kimono.
The sensational murder of Sugar Torch, burlesque queen, triggers a manhunt in the teeming streets of Little Tokyo and Los Angeles and fires a turbulent love story between an American girl and a Japanese boy.
You mean you want to marry her?
You wouldn't have said it that way if I were white.
It can never work out, Chris. If he feels like that, what can I expect from you?
Everything. Because I love you.
The Crimson Kimono.
So first of all, Crimson Kimono has is set in this sort of seedy burlesque underworld of Los Angeles, and it includes maybe the best burlesque name I've ever heard in a movie, which is Sugar Torch. But what I found so riveting about this film was that it starts out and you think it's going to be this fairly straightforward, police procedural in the Naked City kind of mode. And it has some of it. It does have some of that. But the longer it goes and the more we get to know these characters and the more he becomes invested in this relationship, it seems as if like solving the crime is actually the element of the story that Fuller is the least interested in, which is one of the things I really loved about it, that it's, that it's basically, it becomes a love triangle.
And yeah, I think you're right. I think that he does this again and again. Like, if you think of a movie like Pickup on South Street, he's not really that interested in solving who the atomic spies are. He's really interested in the atmosphere, the environment,
the city, the scene,
and the way that the characters are being twisted by the pressure they're being put under, But especially the mood and the atmosphere,
Yeah.
So in a way,
it's a sweaty movie. It's a very sweaty movie, which I always appreciate.
Yeah, plot is not that important in a way to Fuller,
Right.
Something else is important.
Right. And then the way that he situates these three characters, these two police detectives, one white, one Asian American, and this woman who initially is sort of a witness, sort of someone they're working with on the case, and then these feelings develop between them. There are different dynamics at play. There is who is in control in each of the relationships with the woman. There is what that does to the very friendly relationship between these two men, and the way that those relationships manifest themselves even in scenes that are not about that. And I think that's what's really masterful about this script.
Yes. And he was a writer, by the way.
Oh yeah.
He was not just a director, he was a writer.
And a great one.
He started out as a screenwriter. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think he really is interested in those sort of psychological interplays, as opposed to the plot, because after you caught the criminals and everything, they're still going to have to work together. There's still going to be a romance, and that's what he's really interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that we talk sometimes about how these, especially 50s movies, thankfully, we're not hung up on the sort of like 20 minutes of wrap-ups and endings the way that contemporary films too often are. That's so often it's just like they slap the cuffs on the guy, the end, ba-bum, movie's over. But this one does have to go on, a few minutes longer because we are actually more interested in the resolution of the relationships than in the resolution of the crime.
I feel that's very true of a lot of police procedurals. I'm much more interested in the policemen and their lives outside of the station house than I am in whether they're going to catch the criminal or not. Why do you think Fuller was so inspirational to people like Godard? Why was he so inspirational to the French? Why did Godard say Fuller is cinema? What did he mean by that?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's such a, what was really striking, because I just very recently watched The Naked Kiss for the first time as well.
Right.
And I think I don't know that there's another filmmaker, at least certainly not in this era, who is so simultaneously working in what is lurid and sort of melodramatic and over the top.
Sensationalistic. Yeah.
Sensationalistic. It's incredibly but you never get a feeling that he's looking down on that material. It's sensationalism that's approached with sincerity.
Right.
And I think, and that is not a mixture that makes sense. and it's not something that should work, certainly not as often as it does with him. And I think that's just exciting. It's just exciting to watch.
There's like, the sort of plot devices, the love triangle, the murder mystery, like all of those things can exist in theater, in novels, in lots of different places. When you say like what makes movies different, and I think that's part of why all the French New Wave people stood out so much, is because they were really clear about what makes movies different than anything else. And it's those atmospherics that you're talking about. It's those, those long, slow shots. It's the kids like throwing a little fit over something that doesn't matter. It's, and when you're talking about Fuller is not as concerned with who the actual criminal is and sort of working that stuff out, that to me is what is coming from there. He's actually more interested in the things that only movies can do and that movies do really good. And those other things that are part of storytelling in lots of other mediums are sort of, that's part of the nature of the beast, but he's a filmmaker. He's a cinema.
I think you're so right. And I think about a shot in 400 Blows where the gym teacher is taking all the students through town, and the students are running away from him, and the shot is completely on top, and we're seeing this whole group, and it's getting smaller and smaller. But I also think you're right, Jason, which is, in order to do this kind of pulp, you could say, pulp subject matter, you have to believe in some way.
Yes.
You have to. It has to be sincere. You can't fake it.
Yep.
Yeah. So he was able to convey that he really believed it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, and it wasn't just that he was inventive and like a Naked Kiss, always doing strange things, but it was also that he believed that these people were faced with this kind of life, which was really sensational, melodramatic, crashing down on their heads,
Yeah.
He believes.
He did. And whatever he puts in his film, I believe. All right, Mr. Lopate, thank you for that marvelous top 5. Really a killer group of films. Now let's find out about the other big doings of the entertainment business in the year of 1959. Here is Mike with the Hollywood Minute.
Hollywood Freaks on the Hollywood scene. The biggest movie in 1959 by most metrics was Ben-Hur, William Wyler's religious epic starring Charlton Heston, the most expensive film ever made to that point. It won a record 11 Oscars, Lord of mercy, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor Hugh Griffith. It was also the #1 movie at the box office by a considerable stretch, grossing 4 times as much as the runner-up, Disney's The Shaggy Dog. Lord have mercy, there's a chasm there, and I don't just mean in intake.
Yeah. Mr. Lopate, thoughts on Ben-Hur? Where do you land on that one?
It's hard for me because I really do like William Wyler. And I think was a great filmmaker. And of course, when he got to Ben-Hur, he was at the end of his career pretty much. And he had this enormous budget. And is he the filmmaker? Is the producer the filmmaker? Is the banker the filmmaker? Hard to tell. Right. But the William Wyler of The Letter of Dodsworth is a wonderful filmmaker, or Best Years of Our Lives, And by the time he got to Ben-Hur, it's hard to know who's in control. But some of those directors, like George Stevens and William Wyler, were wonderful craftsmen, wonderful artists. And I don't know that it was entirely their fault that they reached a point where they were so respected that they were given these huge bonanzas to direct.
Right.
Simone Signoret won the Oscar for Best Actress for Room at the Top, which also took the prize for Best Adapted Screenplay. Shelley Winters won Best Supporting Actress for The Diary of Anne Frank, and the Best Original Screenplay trophy went to Pillow Talk. That Doris Day and Rock Hudson vehicle, their first, was also among the big box office hits of 1959. Others were Operation Petticoat, Some Like It Hot, Suddenly Last Summer, and Imitation of Life.
Sir, anything you like, especially in that bunch?
Well, the thing about Douglas Sirk and Imitation of Life is that he's the opposite of Samuel Fuller, because he had an ironic detachment. So he's filming melodrama, but with a kind of with a sense of irony, and it works too. It works beautifully. I think that's an amazing movie. But like the two of them were coming from entirely different directions.
Yep. That makes sense.
1959 was a big year for new trends in cinema. Aside from the aforementioned French New Wave, which kicked off with the 400 Blows at Cannes and was followed by Claude Chabrol's Les Cousins at Berlin, Joseph E. Levine's stateside release of Hercules was a big hit, kicking off the sword and sandal craze. And on December 9, the documentary Behind the Great Wall was released in Aroma-Rama, which pumped clean scents through the theater's air conditioning to complement the action on screen. A similar competing process called, there's nothing more 59 than this, Smell-O-Vision, with the dashes and everything.
And they were trying everything at this moment,
Smell-O-Vision was unleashed in January 1960's film The Smell of Mystery, and that was the end of that. Did you go to a Smell-O-Vision screening, Lopate?
It's sort of like William Castle with the Tingler,
Yeah.
These are these crazy devices that were done then. And I think I did go to a Smell-O-Vision film once, and it didn't knock me out, I got to tell you. But anyway.
Yeah. But these were all...
Think about it. 59 was a year when 59 and 60 had 400 Blows, Breathless, Paris Belongs to Us, the first Eric Romer movie, Sign of the Lion, and Claude Chabrol's The Cousins. So the entire French New Wave was represented right at that year.
Yeah.
In 1959, we bid farewell to the great spectacle director Cecil B. DeMille, the great screwball comedy director Preston Sturgis, the great novelist and screenwriter Raymond Chandler, the great stage and screen actress Ethel Barrymore, the great swashbuckler Errol Flynn, and the great character actor Victor McLaglen. McLaglen,
yeah.
Yeah, all right. Yes. I got that right the first time. See, I questioned myself. And we welcomed into this world Exorcist star Linda Blair, Purple Rain star Vanity, Shawshank writer-director Frank Darabont, Anthony LaPaglia, Val Kilmer, Patricia Clarkson, Tracy Ullman, Catherine Keener, Emma Thompson, Ving Rhames, John Hawkes, Rebecca De Mornay, Jason Alexander, Elizabeth Pina, Dylan Baker, Norm MacDonald, Rupert Everett, Bradley Whitford, and Allison Janney for all you West Wing heads. Both Matthew Modine and Vincent D'Onofrio for all you Full Metal Jacket heads, and Rosanna Arquette and Aidan Quinn for all you desperately seeking Susan heads. And that is your Hollywood Minute.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Mr. Lopate, you ready to do a lightning round?
Why not?
All right. I'm going to feed you a list of titles pulled from Daniel Bloom's Screen World Film Manual for 1959. You can comment briefly on each or pass if you wish. And here we go. North by Northwest.
Wonderful. A film that I can watch again and again.
Pickpocket.
As great a film as ever been made, but I can't watch it all the time. I have to be in a certain mood.
Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo.
Yes. I like the way it breathes. It respires, and something that only he could do, which is to have quiet spaces, languors, then building up to real tensions. It's an inspiration, yeah.
Yeah, one of the great hangout movies.
Yes, exactly.
Bud Bedeker's Ride Lonesome.
Yeah, I like it, I mean, there's an interesting article recently in Cineast where they're trying to take Bedeker down a peg and saying, he wasn't that great, but I find his films to be, geological in an interesting way.
Yeah, no, I can rewatch pretty much any of the Bedeker Randolph Scott movies and have a great time. The Nun Story.
I think that it wears better than it did when it first opened up.
Interesting.
Cinephiles did not like The Nun Story. Fred Zinnemann was not was denigrated in many ways. But now when I watch it, I like the chemistry a lot between Audrey Hepburn and Peter Finch, and I think that that Zinnemann deserves his place.
I'm going to mangle my French here, and I apologize to any French speakers. Les liaisons dangereuses.
Oh, I love Les liaisons dangereuses because Thelonious Monk's score was so great. And by the way, how could we talk about Anatomy of a Murder without mentioning the Duke Ellington score?
Oh God! Oh, it's amazing.
That was so important. That was so important to that movie. So this was a wonderful period where you had Duke Ellington and Thelonious Monk, and Charlie Mingus doing Shadows. That was incredible.
Elevator to the Gallows coming around the corner.
God,
yeah.
Miles Davis. It was incredible. Yeah. So but Les Liaisons Dangereuses, it's a great novel, and of course, Vadim is, he's not one of the world's greatest directors, but he's always puts beautiful women in his movies.
Yeah, he knew how to make a sexy movie, if not a great movie.
Yes.
Compulsion was released in 1959.
Yes. Yeah, Orson Welles is in that.
Mm-hmm.
Bradford Dillman.
Yes.
Yeah, watchable. What else can you say about it?
No, that's fine. We had another Preminger picture in 1959. Porgy and Bess was released that year.
Yeah, he's had a lot of problems with that and Corman Jones. He was very keen on using black actors and singers. And now he's sometimes criticized for it. But Porgy and Bess, in some respects, is one of the great American artworks. So. What are you going to do? It's not really movie material. It's stage material.
Frank Capra and Frank Sinatra teamed up for A Hole in the Head.
Yeah, that's almost unwatchable now. Really, not a very good movie.
Martin Ritt's The Sound and the Fury.
Yeah, that was this period with Melvin and Harriet Frank made all these screenplays. Like Norman Ray. They were a team, and Ritt was made all these sort of socially conscious films, and this was a period when the South was represented by a lot of New York method actors,
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's so strange to see the way the New York method acting would get a hold of the South as this kind of expressive device,
Mm-hmm.
So and poor Faulkner,
Look Back in Anger.
Yeah, it's a nice movie. I think John Osborne's play still has a lot going for it, and there's a lot of bitterness in that male-female relationship. It's like English version of Ingmar Bergman.
Well, you know what? In that case, let's close out the lightning round with 1959 was the U.S. release of Bergman's Wild Strawberries.
Okay. Yeah. that was a movie to take your date to. Yeah, absolutely. And I did.
And there we have it. There we have it. All right, Mr. Lopate, that was a wonderful lightning round. The book, again, is My Affair with Art House Cinema, Essays and Reviews, out July 2nd. Where can people read your work regularly? And are you on social media or anything like that?
Social media, but I've written 20 books, and you're welcome to buy them or to listen to them on audiobooks.
There we go. I am Fun City Cinema on Instagram, Jason-Bailey on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, where you can find under my list the top 5s for every episode of the show. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Brainwashed Lib on Twitter and Fifth Column Films on Instagram and Blue Sky.
And of course, if you like the show and think other people might like it too, please do leave us a rating and or review on your podcatcher of choice. If you'd like to join our mailing list and get weekly show notes and where to watch these movies and so forth, you can do that at buttondown.email/a-very-good-year. Mike, before we go, what is your parting recommendation for 1959?
Look, last time we did 59, my recommendation was Araya, and that movie's so good, I think I just have to recommend it again. No.
Okay.
I'm just going to say, movie's so good, it should be just recommended on every episode. We got to talk about Hiroshima Mon Amour. We've talked about Truffaut. We've talked about Ozu. You know, there's so many, I mean, Crimson Kimono, you've got the sort of the different cultures interacting. Hiroshima Mon Amour is a combination French and Japanese production. And it's you know, it's one of these post-war movies. It's obviously Hiroshima's in the title. They're dealing with the nuclear weapons. They're dealing with the sort of aftermath of, you know, of the war and everything that happened. But like American movies that deal with this stuff and like sort of British movies and even Japanese movies, there's a sort of like, there's a lot of like complicitness and what are we... and how do we feel and all these kinds of things, but they're all sort of inappropriately specific. And I feel like it takes a French person to like make a movie that is philosophical enough to actually approach this topic correctly. You know,
and
like,
also Alain Resnais is a master. He's really a giant.
And the movie's written by a French novelist, you know, who sort of who wasn't a part of a Hollywood system or even a Japanese system, you know, like it was part of a new wave. It was part of people who are trying to do something different with movies. The movie feels like it was written by a poet, and I don't know how to say that without make it sound good. I don't know if most people would think that would make a movie sound good or not, but I'm telling you, like, it is everything sort of perfect about an approach to a subject that I feel like I just, you know, a lot of times when we're talking about nuclear weapons, we're talking about, you know, Strangelove and stuff like that, right? We're talking about, you know, the president has an hour and all these kinds of things. And like, because it's so dramatic, and those are great movies too, but like at some point we need some philosophical French person to come along and go, what the fuck are we doing here? Like, you know, and there's shots in the beginning of that movie that are closer to actually making me vomit than maybe anything I've ever seen in a movie. Yeah. Which is the kind of thing that, like, you know, they're not just showing the aftermath of these bombs, they're showing the human experience of them in a way that is not sensationalistic, that is poetic and hurtful and internal. And anyway, it's just, there's so much going on with that movie. There's no way. I'm not smart enough to describe it, but I am smart enough to watch it and really love it and recommend it. So how about you?
Not so surprising. Yeah. The same one who made Hiroshima Mon Amour made Night and Fog, you know. So you know, you could look at the horrors of the 20th century. Yeah.
How about you, Bailey?
You know what? We delved in some real highbrow material. We've talked about some of the great art films of the 1950s, but you know what? I wore my Roger Corman t-shirt because my pick is A Bucket of Blood, which was released in 1959, which is a terrific blackest of black comedies, directed by Mr. Corman from a Charles B. Griffith screenplay, with Dick Miller, the great character actor Dick Miller, always a guy who would come in for a scene or two and crush it in a rare leading role, playing the busboy at a beatnik cafe, who discovers that he can kill beatniks and use them in his art, and it goes from there. The Corman Griffith team would reteam for Little Shop of Horrors, which would of course become a much more famous and remembered cult film from this era. But I prefer A Bucket of Blood. I think it's a really funny. I think it's a
Okay.
funny picture. I think it's a kind of a wonderful parody of beatnik culture happening at the moment. And I love Dick Miller, so it's a real pleasure to see him in the leading role. So that's my extremely lowbrow recommendation to send us off.
Wow.
Thank you again, Phillip Lopate, for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening.
It was a very